It was the greatest empire the world had ever seen. At its height, Britain ruled over a quarter of the world's population. Everywhere they went, the men and women who built the empire created a home away from home. From the wastes of Canada to the fertile highlands of Africa and the hill stations of India.
Lands. The question was always, how do we live with the people we rule? The answer would shape their countries, but it would also shape our own.
The story starts here on the east coast of India in the early 1600s.
Easy prejudices about the empire. The caricature is that it was all run by arrogant racists oppressing downtrodden natives. And like all caricatures, there is a degree of truth in that. But Charles Stuart belongs to an early generation of the British in India who were seduced by the place.
For Charles Stuart, India was neither alien nor forbidden. and on British men to grow what would become that trademark of empire, a luxuriant moustache, Indian style.
Hello. Can I talk to you about your moustache? Yes? Good. Can I come in?
Yes.
Now. How long have you had it? Do you think I'm a bit of a girl for not having a moustache?
না না মহিলা বলে সেরকম আপনারা দেখতে না, আপনি পুরুষ পুরুষ।
That's a relief.
The traders of the East India Company liked to mix business with pleasure. Relaxing with the locals was an everyday affair. To judge from their clothes, you often couldn't tell one from the other.
This was the empire making up the rules about the appropriate relations between the races as it went along. In fact, there weren't really any
Ochterlony liked nothing more than to repair to his residence for a quiet evening in with his harem. Dressed in full Indian costume, his shisha pipe at his side. The offspring of these mixed races Chennai, formerly known as Madras. It's a big occasion in the Anglo-Indian calendar. Anglo-Indians tend to marry within the community, so the term now means having some British blood, often several generations back.
But that's history. That's all. You look at, just take it as a part of history. And like every country has a history, this is our history.
It obviously has some big pull for you, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. One, my family. The roots are very deep, and I am proud to be who I am here. I have both worlds to enjoy. Enjoy the West as well as I've enjoyed the East.
You don't feel any resentment against these men who came over here and fathered children.
But in Victorian Britain, these relationships were seen as subversive, even dangerous. The country was in the grip of a religious revival. The British were adopting a new, more puritanical Christianity, and they wanted the rest of the world to do likewise. That shift would soon be felt on the far fringes of empire. It wasn't long before Victorian values arrived in India. They were brought not only by missionaries, but by wives sent out from Britain who were arriving in No wonder the Memsahibs ran for the hills. They had very different ideas about how to make themselves at home in India.
of us from them.
Of course, the great shift in attitudes was shared by men and memsahibs. But as mistresses of the house, it was the women who were on the front line. The Complete Indian Housekeeper and Cook by Flora Annie Steele and Grace Gardner is an intriguing window into the mind of British India.
It tells you absolutely everything from how much to pay the cook's assistant to the best way to divide up the family possessions when you're moving house by means of 11 camels, to how many coolies it takes to carry a piano. The answer to that one, if you're interested, is 16.
The kitchen was the principal battleground.
Here there were terrible warnings. The kitchen is a black hole, the pantry a sink. The only servant who will condescend to touch
because it is English people's dirt, not entirely natives.
Yet for all their apparent self-confidence, these were women who lived in a state of fear. Fear that the climate and conditions in India might actually kill them.
In memory of Mary, wife of R.C. Lewin of the Madras Civil Service, June the 10th, 1858, aged 28. That one.
along with the snobbery and self-righteousness, went a certain fortitude and courage as well. Maybe they passed themselves off as the master race because deep down they knew that they were an endangered species.
But adversity seemed merely to spur the 19th century British on to further expansion across the globe. By Britain as a trading post in 1819. It was Thomas Stamford Raffles who saw its potential at the crossroads of East and West. The British established free trade and the rule of law and turned a pestilential island into a commercial metropolis which drew in Malays, Indians and Chinese. In this colonial melting pot, the British were determined to remain distinct. If the bungalow was the place the British ran away to, the club was where they came together. Inside, the club was designed to reassure, a piece of foreign soil that was forever England.
Grieve when the white men leave their huts, because they're obviously, definitely nuts. Mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. Mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun.
Do you play golf every evening? Or?
Not every evening, as often as one can do. One does, one likes to. It's a good form of relaxation.
But mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday.
As well as sports, there were amateur theatricals, solid British fare like Gilbert and Sullivan or the latest West End smash. There were Burns nights and bridge evenings, dances and fancy dress parties galore. and, of course, tea on the terrace.
The clubs served British comfort food, sausage and mash or pies from Melton Mowbray. When one member of the Singapore club asked for fresh papaya, he was served tinned apricot.
Dogs beyond this point, and that used to annoy my mother
And
immensely.
also the dogs complained apparently.
Well, they would, wouldn't they? I mean, it would be a natural thing for them to complain. Anyway, Dad would bring me in here for lunch, and I spent my whole life here. And my wife is a Colombian, and she said, you know, if it wasn't for the men's bar, we would have been divorced a long time ago, because she knew when I was in the men's
Fossils in a club in Singapore.
Very much so.
clinging on to our colonial past.
You sort of you do belong in the past, don't
We
you?
do, we've lost it. I have. He's lost it completely.
But there was more than one kind of empire. In 1831, a young Scottish lawyer was travelling across the wild and snowy lands of British Canada. His name was Adam Ferguson. He'd come all the way from Perthshire to look for a suitable spot to build a new town for Scottish emigrants.
Adam Ferguson was just one of
The Scots in particular left their homeland in vast numbers. They would play a huge role in the building of empire, not only as settlers, but as soldiers, missionaries, engineers, and pioneers. Ferguson and his companions eventually found a site in a sheltered valley 60 miles from what is now Toronto. There was water to power a mill and wood and stone for building in a harsh climate.
It was tough going at first. They built themselves log
sprang up all over the empire, from Canada to Australia. The settlers built in the style they knew, from the houses they lived in, to the churches where they worshipped, and the pub where they gathered in the evening, always striving to hold on to a sense of home.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Jeremy.
Hello, Jeremy. Thanks for coming to my shop. I'm Heather.
You're Heather?
Owner of the shop, yes. Nice to meet you.
Nice Scottish name, eh?
Welcome.
So what do you sell in a Scottish shop?
Well, we sell all things Scottish. We sell all the sweets and the cakes and the drinks and the crisps and all the stories and all the connections.
Stories?
All the stories. People like to come and tell us their stories and their Scottish connections and all their memories from their past.
Got any deep-fried Mars bars?
Oh, no, I haven't. I do have the Mars bars.
Meat pies?
I do have meat pies. I have Scotch pies and bridies and steak pies and
haggis?
black pudding, haggis. Oh, yes, I''ve got the haggis and the sausage and the
God,
good
I didn't
stuff.
even know they still made
We've
camp
got the
coffee.
camp coffee and...
People buy this stuff.
Yes, they just love that we carry all of these products that they grew up with.
So your customers are mainly people who've moved here?
They are mainly
From
people that
Scotland.
have moved here, and the fact that there's a connection here to their past is fabulous. That seems to be the big draw.
Gosh, what fun.
Blast from the past. Bring back all the memories from childhood.
Family and history. The growth of this successful community was a pretty peaceful affair. But in some colonial settlements, it was a very different story. The biggest land grab of all was still to come. British settlers started coming here to Kenya in the early 1900s. Then it was a vast, thinly populated region of mountains and forests, huge plains and wild animals.
The settlers liked what they saw. West Africa was full of swamps and diseases and things, but here the land was fertile, the climate was glorious, like England on the very nicest kind of summer's day. Instant, and it was savage. We burned all the huts, he said. We razed the banana plantations to the ground, and every soul was either shot or bayoneted.
Surrounded by their estates, they built grand houses in the English style. A taste of Edwardian England in the so-called Dark Continent. Some stayed on after independence in the 1960s.
Jeremy, nice to meet you.
Very good
Nice
to see you. Thank you for having us.
Tony Seth Smith's grandparents came to Kenya in 1904.
That's the first animal I've recognised today.
That's my uncle's first house.
It's a grass hut.
It's just a grass hut and some mud walls. The zebra skin on the wall probably stopped the draft going through a crack in it. And cart. And then, of course, during the night you'd have a little thorn enclosure which you kept the oxen in, and probably a lion would come round and roar upwind of it, and whew, all your oxen had gone and the lions nailed two of them in the dark, you know. But it was, I suppose that was a part of the fun, wasn't it? You know, it was exciting. And
that's a great picture.
This is your father, is it?
That's my father.
With a dead lion?
With a dead lion. You know, these lions, they didn't sit around like you see them in a park nowadays. The lions in those days knew how to look after themselves, and there wasn't a park.
Oh, but even the lions aren't what they were, eh?
No, everything's fallen by the wayside.
Do you think this policy of trying to attract enterprising people with a bit of money to invest, do you think it worked for this country?
I think it worked in the long term, because unlike today, where much of the developing world is developing as a result of aid and packages of money, the donor thing, there were no donors. The country was developed on the backs of the settlers, people like my father.
Which one of these is your father?
That's my father. They came out and they brought all their family money out, and it was all sunk into this country.
Do you think they had a sense of what the purpose of the British Empire was, or were they just concerned with getting on with their lives?
I think there was quite a lot of that. Englishmen were proud of having an empire, being a part of it, and I think that every family in England around about that time had a member of it who's serving or doing development somewhere in the empire, be it an administrator in India, or a policeman in Nigeria, or a farmer in Kenya, or a gold miner in South Africa. Everyone had a member of the family, and so they were all very aware of Britain's empire, and were proud of it then.
Are you proud of it?
Yes. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing to be ashamed of.
One African writer dismissed the white farmers as parasites in paradise, living off land they had taken from others. Whatever the justice of that remark, the white settlers of Kenya felt they It was the British who created the country's capital, Nairobi. The city still has plenty of the rough and ready feel of the early days. Not much more than a century ago, this was just a strip of swampy ground. No one planned Nairobi as a capital city, it just happened. It happened because it was a railway stop on one of the most ambitious lines in the entire British Empire, the Lunatic Line. The way to Lake Victoria. It was built to bring British goods to the interior and raw materials out to ports on the coast. It would encourage British farmers to come out here and settle. There was plenty to merit the title Lunatic Line. There was the cost, £534 million in today's money. There was the engineering required to allow a train to climb from sea level into the mountains and then to plunge down into the Great Rift Valley. And to construct 1,200 bridges on the way.
But it wasn't the British who built the railway, it wasn't even the Africans. This remarkable feat was the work of 32,000 labourers, craftsmen and engineers brought in by the British from India. They knew how to build railways there.
Soon the lunatic line was carrying coffee and tea, sisal and wheat from the settlers' farms to the coast.
To come into this wilderness. Harsh African conditions, vegetation, a strange land to them. It wasn't very easy because water was scarce, especially when they were going towards across the Taru Desert towards Savo. They didn't have water for showering for like weeks. You know, they would just get enough water just to drink. And what my great-grandfather told me is when the carriage would come for their drinking water, they would pretend to be clumsy about drinking their water because basically they'd go and scoop it out and they'd pretend to be clumsy. Horrifying, isn't it?
Let me ask you a political question. The fact that you and your community are now a very, very long way from where naturally you came from, and you're in this alien culture. I mean, was what the British did in bringing you here a good thing or a bad thing?
That's a good question. To be honest, I have no regrets for being here. And when people ask me, you know, who are you? Where are you from? You know, I see Kenya as my home, and I have no regrets for coming here.
The Indian workers who built the Kenya Railway were part of a bigger empire story. The shifting of populations around the globe to meet the empire's need for labour. In the 18th century, Africans were taken as slaves to the sugar plantations of the West Indies. Their descendants now people those islands. In the 19th century, Tamils from South India were sent to pick tea on estates in Sri Lanka or tap rubber in Malaya. All had to make new homes in Britain's ever-growing empire. The world still lives with the consequences of these great population shifts. In the 20th century, Indians came to play a vital part in the Kenyan economy as shopkeepers and professionals. Then, on the 12th of December 1963, Kenya gained independence from Britain. Now, Indians in Kenya were seen as unwelcome relics from the days of British rule. Many of them feared for their future and turned to their former colonial masters to provide a new home.
The Asian community prepared to leave. Britain was their destination. The Kenya government had not pulled its punches in telling the British passport-holding Asians they were not wanted. Asian shopkeepers were left with little alternative but to wind up their businesses and seek new routes. The airport was jammed with those lucky enough to get flight tickets to Britain.
Though not everyone in Britain was happy about it at the time, the empire was coming home. Many Kenyan Asians chose to settle in the Midlands, in cities like Leicester. In the process, they transformed the face of urban Britain. Today, over a quarter of Leicester's population is of Asian origin. They've worked hard and done well, as in Kenya, specializing in running shops and businesses.
Oh, you must be Ramila.
Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank
Come
you
on
very
in.
much. Thank you. Thank you.
Ramila eight. His sister Madhu was 18 when she left Kenya and went to India. But she didn't feel at home there and followed her family to England.
That's the model of our shop in Kenya.
That was the family business, was it?
Yeah. That's me.
Oh, you're the little boy, yeah.
Yeah. That's my elder brother.
Uh-huh.
That's my dad at the back.
Mm-hmm.
That's my mom at the back.
So this is Grandma over here when,
Yeah.
when slightly younger, eh? Must have taken all of you some getting used to. Come from the warmth of East Africa and...
So cold.
At that time, I think not many people even had a central heating. And used to use a charcoal
Your
fires
paraffin heaters.
or paraffin heaters. There were no bathrooms.
No
People
bathrooms?
No. People had to go public bath at that
When
time.
we stayed at my aunt's house and says, you can't have a bath like you used to have twice a day in Kenya. It will be once a week now. We'll have to go city center to the public baths.
Public bath.
Yes, so...
You must have thought we were a really dirty people, did you? It must have been very strange.
No bath, no toilet.
Toilet?
No heater. Toilet
outside.
Outside.
When you think about the British Empire, most people, as far as I can see in this country, have a pretty black and white view about what the British Empire was. And what they're taught very often is that it was really pretty much a bad thing, imposing your rule on somebody else. What do you guys think about the empire?
You know, in one way, I think we thank the British Empire, you know, for...
You thank the
Yeah,
British
thank them, because where we are at the moment and what we have and everything...
used to have a job.
Yeah, and it's because of that, you know, everything what we achieved and we are, so we've got to thank the British Empire.
Do you know how politically incorrect you are?
When I came here, there was a job. If you want to work, can go to college, study.
I think wherever British people were, and they went and wherever, whichever country they ruled, the country was good. You know, it was ruled good, it was better and everything, and there was no corruption, nothing. That's what my feelings are. As soon as the British left any country, I think that just went downhill. That's my own feelings about it.
Mm-hmm.
builders left behind. Next time, playing the game. How the empire spread the gospel of sport around the world. In its wide open spaces was born a new kind of British hero, hungry for glory and adventure, determined that nothing should stand in his way. For the pin-up boys of empire,